Welcome to Mazecast. This is Alex, and I'm joined here by Sarah and Andrew. You know the drill, so I'm going to introduce Sarah. She's going to talk a little bit about her correspondences with Manson. Take it away, Sarah.
Okay, thanks, Alex. First, I want to say how nice it is to see Andrew again after a long hiatus. Yay!
Very kind.
All right, so yeah, I guess I want to talk a little bit about what happened when I wrote to Christopher Manson. So what happened, as we all know, is we had a little way of corresponding with Manson via White Raven when he was active on Into the Abyss. But then he has departed the site as far as we can tell and is no longer conducting the Ask Manson feature. So I was sort of feeling sad about that we didn't have a way to contact him. So I thought, I'll just try writing to him. So I did. I wrote him this pretty long letter, and I'm not going to share my letter because it's kind of embarrassing. It was a little, it was kind of gushy and personal about how much Maze has meant to me. He was very sincere, but anyway, and he wrote back. It was
like, just ask one question about your correspondence with him.
Yeah.
Because it sounded as though somehow maybe I misread his letter, but it sounded as though from reading one or two of his, either of his letters that that you had like sent him some puzzle that you were working on or something like that. Was that true?
Yeah. So I told him about how the Maze community had sort of got me excited about puzzles and had got me interested in writing puzzles. And I told him I've written a couple of sets for Puzzle Pint, which is, a monthly event that has people solving puzzles in bars and things like that. So I've gone into writing puzzles and have become pretty serious about it. That all came out of Maze. So I told him about that and sent him some puzzles. What's that?
What kind of puzzles specifically?
Oh, well, they're like hunt puzzles, if you know about puzzle hunts. So like the MIT Mystery Hunt is the most well-known kind. So they're all different varieties. It's like, maybe it's a crossword, but it has a twist, or maybe it's just a bunch of pictures and you have to figure out what it means. So they're all kind of different. And Puzzle Pint is fun because it has a theme each time. So I did a Dracula one and I did a Labyrinth one, like Labyrinth, the Jim Henson Labyrinth one. And actually Vincent collaborated with me on that one. That was really fun. And then we also did one about ghosts, which was fun too. So yeah, and and I've written for other venues, so it's become like a really serious hobby. Anyways, yes, I told Manson about that. To answer your question. Now I'm talking about myself.
No, it's all the backstory.
It's the backstory. Yeah, so that was one of the things I told him. I said, this has really become something important to my life, and it all came about from Maze. So so he wrote back, and that was really exciting. And to see the letter in my mailbox was like embarrassingly exciting. And this is the first letter that he sent me. I put a little sticky over my own address, which is there.
It's not framed.
What's that?
Right, it's not in a frame.
I know. I should really frame them. I have kept it carefully tucked away. If anyone wants to read them, we've posted them on Mazecast, so you can actually read them. In the letter, I did talk about some of the ideas I had about Maze, but I also said, I know that you don't like answering questions about Maze, and I certainly don't expect you to answer any questions or tell me any solutions. And he didn't, and he sort of said, he said that people are always pressing him to give answers, and he's really decided he prefers not to. But we had a little back and forth about. I talked about how I like stories about places that have kind of a malevolent places where the place itself is a character in the story that is kind of creepy or malevolent, and that I liked Maze for that reason. And he talked about that a bit. And he also mentioned Raymond Roussel and in that first letter, and that was really interesting because I ended up doing some research on that, and Vincent did as well. And he's turned out to be a pretty interesting guy, and his methods in writing have turned out to be maybe relevant and interesting ways to Maze. I'm not really great at speaking off the cuff, guys. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm umming and ahhing a lot.
So Raymond Roussel, who I had never heard of before reading that letter. So he was a French poet and writer, I guess around from the turn of the 1800s and the 1900s. He would have been active, I suppose, yeah.
Right. He died in 1933 at the age of 56, I think. Didn't live very long. He was sort of an independently wealthy guy who was so convinced of his own artistic genius. And he was a poet, and he also put on these elaborate theatrical productions. And they weren't well received, and people, would go just for the sole purpose of jeering at him and making fun of him, until some of the surrealists caught on to what he was doing, or I guess some of the surrealists felt kinship with what he was doing and would also go to these plays and try to cheer and, support what he was doing. Mm-hmm. So the surrealists really liked what he was doing. But most people, he felt like he was destined for greatness, and he never got there in his lifetime.
Mm.
What were you trying to say, Alex?
I said they didn't get him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, his work is very
dense is the word.
What's that?
Dense, I think you said.
It's extremely dense and very opaque. And he, after his death, he had left a document to be published, which explains his methods in writing his books, his poetry, and his novels, called, which I ordered, How I Wrote Certain of My Books. This particular book has a bunch of other stuff in it too, but the document where he explains his method is in it. And it's very interesting because his method consists of, basically he performs some kind of wordplay, and then he uses that as the basis of his entire work. So I'm gonna read a little bit of it, just to kind of give you an idea of it. Okay. So he says, so he wrote this whole thing explaining how his method. Okay. I chose two almost identical words reminiscent of metagrams, and a metagram is two words that are one letter apart. For example, billard, billiard table, and piard, plunderer. So those are just one letter off. To these, I added similar words capable of two different meanings, thus obtaining two almost identical phrases. So in the case of billard and piard, the two phrases I obtained were, number one, les lettres du blanc sur les bancs de vieux billard, so the white letters on the cushions of the old billiard table. Number two, les lettres du blanc sur les bancs du vieux piard, the white men's letters on the hoards of the old plunderers. So he takes those two very similar phrases, so he's changed one letter of billard to get piard, and then has used similar words for the rest of them, but is interpreting the words differently. So blanc in one becomes white man, and blanc in another one becomes just the color white. And then his entire book is written to get from one of those sentences to the other.
So this is extremely Mansonian. This is extremely, as soon as I read about this was particularly suggestive to me of The Practical Alchemist, the book, the entire, the companion to Maze, another puzzle book of Manson's that is based entirely on this kind of like shifting from one word to another purely by these additions, subtractions, or substitutions of individual letters. So as soon as I read from your letter, and as soon as I went off and read about Roussel and found that, and I would love to read this book, the one about how he wrote the things, that just struck me as such a Manson-like sort of formula and sort of operation there.
Yeah, exactly. So he had this whole underlying system that he used to create his poetry and his books, and it all hinged on these strange little word games that he played with himself, essentially. And this whole essay on how he wrote his books is basically itemized lists of the different word changes he used and how you see that in his different books. Now, I have to say, I had a hard time getting much out of. I bought New Impressions of Africa, which is this giant book of poetry, and it's one of the things he explains using his method. And I had a hard time getting through it. It was difficult, and it's also difficult, right, because he wrote it in French, so all the wordplay is using the French words, And then this poor translator had to work, can you imagine the translation challenge?
No, I cannot. I cannot imagine that.
Surely the translator must have just not, it must have been like when you translate, a poem or whatever, but you don't bother about making it rhyme. Surely the translator must not have attempted to replicate that kind of wordplay in English. That would be amazing if they could, but surely not.
How is that even possible?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, he didn't explain every single thing that he had in mind, right? So the translator had to do the best that the translator could do with the knowledge that he had. But yeah, that's why it's sort of nice. The book provides the French and English side by side, so you can compare if you know a little here. But the other interesting thing actually about this book is that he commissioned illustrations for it. And he commissioned these illustrations by just writing like these one-line descriptions to the artist. Like he purposely didn't provide any context whatsoever, just like one sentence, and just sent it off and then took whatever he got and put it in the book. Yes. It's pretty neat. So the interesting thing about him is there's lots of interesting things, but his work inspired a lot of people, including the surrealists and including this creative movement, which I've forgotten the name of, and I'm just going to look it up here quickly if I can. Oh, Oulipo. Did you look that up? Do you know what that is?
On the Wikipedia from his article too that they mentioned.
So that's a more recent movement, and it's basically people who write with constraints. So an example that is really well known is Avoid, right? Which is that book that was written, it's called A Lipogram, I think, and it was written entirely without ease. So the whole novel, is missing the letter E, and actually the book is about the fact that the letter E is missing. So that's an example of a novel written under constraints, and these people were very influenced by Rousseau. And I didn't know
Italo Calvino did I didn't know that my boy Italo Calvino has any association with constrained writing. That's interesting. I'm trying to look that up.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to me to think about how novel writing with constraints overlaps with puzzles, and to think about Rousseau, for me, that's not really a puzzle. He used his wordplay as a tool for generating imagery and for his creative process. And the fact that he wrote about it afterwards almost seemed like he wanted people to understand it, but with a puzzle, the goal is always to have somebody figure it out eventually, right? But I don't know. Maze seems to me like something that is kind of straddling the boundary, or might be straddling the boundary, in that if Manson used this kind of technique as part of his process of creating Maze, how much of it could we ever figure out, and does it matter?
That's interesting. It almost seems like, what you could be suggesting is that from that viewpoint, that there could be elements in the maze that are not there to help the puzzle, but they're also not just completely random, whatever the hell he felt like drawing at that moment, that maybe there could be some elements that were sort of they were called for according to some kind of formal procedure, forward moving formal procedure, but it's not something that you're then supposed to be able to reason backward and reconstruct. But it's also not by accident that the symbols were chosen as they were. Could be.
Right. Yes, that's exactly it. Thank you for expressing it.
Or maybe it's something what Rousseau did doesn't really lend itself. It lends itself as a production that you're watching, but not necessarily as something that you interact with, the way that Manson was trying to do. You know what I mean? It doesn't lend itself to what Manson was trying to do with it. Maybe.
Sure, but then the question, is all of Maze supposed to be interactive, or are there elements of it that you're supposed to just shrug at, but maybe they do have some reason to exist, but it's not an interactive, i.e., puzzle solving reason to exist, if that's what you mean by interactive.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, what you're talking about, I think, is for example, if there's a room in Maze that is in a Victorian style, but the puzzle is about chairs and tables and mirrors and stuff like that. those things don't have to be in a Victorian style. So I think what Manson does very well is he puts different, like he's got a cave style, he's got a Victorian style, etc. So the idea of being able to have a puzzle with different stylistic approaches.
Sure. See.
Yeah, and I think one thing that this kind of method does in terms of creating an effect is it helps create the feeling that things have meaning and purpose, because in a sense they do if they were created using this formal procedure, as you called it, Andrew. But I mean, you're never going to figure it out, but you're going to drive yourself crazy trying, because it's like you can feel that underlying structure is there. You can almost feel that, right? Everything feels purposeful. It feels like it's there for a reason. And it is, but you may never figure it out unless the author decides to explain it to you.
If, the greatest gift that Manson could give us would be, in his twilight years, issue a book titled, what is it? How I Wrote Certain of My Books.
Yeah. One certain of his books.
But then if like the clues you gave about Maze, then we'll still be here for another 100 years.
Sure, great. More podcasts.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, it's interesting. I mean, that's not to say, there's no intentional puzzles in Maze, but I just, I think it doesn't leave open the possibility that, as you said, there's stuff there that's, he may have used a system like this to create. I mean, 45 rooms is a lot of rooms to fill, and like to have a creative system like this to help you generate interesting imagery could be very helpful.
Now, though, I wanted to throw in a counterpoint, which is right from the end of Manson's first letter to you.
Yeah.
He says, speaking of Roussel, he says, his stories of exotic places full of seemingly incomprehensible monuments and fantastical objects have equally astonishing explanations. You might call them solutions to his narratives, which in some way pushes the viewpoint that, like, some kind of, like, at least from Manson's perspective, some kind of solution can be found to Roussel, and therefore, by extension, some kind of solution can be found to everything in his work. But I don't exactly know. Do you know better, like, because you've read more about Roussel, do you know what Manson means by, like, explanations? What's the deal? As in, do they relate to, or are they inspired by things and places in real life, or what else could that mean? Any idea?
No. So his seemingly incomprehensible monuments and fantastical objects. So Locus Solus has, it's very wild and detailed, but extremely bizarre and surreal imagery. And yet, he does explain in his essay, he explains a lot of the images. And again, all of it came out of this system he used. Wordplay.
So it's the verbal explanation.
Yes.
The wordplay explanation. Yeah. I mean, there are solutions.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you read it that way, because I see those quotes, and to me, that sort of means like, that's Manson saying, you guys are always after me for solutions. But like, if I were to give you solutions, not that I'm sure Manson would ever talk like that. He seems like a very lovely, polite man. This is what they would be like. I think he's saying, these are the kinds of solutions that you might get. And I don't think this is how I interpret it. And you might not consider those the kinds of solutions you're looking for.
Gotcha. So the scare quotes are doing an awful lot. Yeah.
That's how I read it, but you could interpret it either way for sure.
No, I think you got a point there. I'm taking a look again at this second.
Okay. It's neat to learn about his his aesthetic influences. I don't know if you're a Peter Greenaway fan. I haven't seen all his movies, but I really liked The Draftsman's Contract. And it was funny because I had watched it on the advice of my sister, because my sister watched it. She's like, I watched this movie and it really reminded me of Maze, and I think you should see it because I think you would really love it.
Sorry, real quick, who's the director and which movie is this?
So this is Peter Greenaway, and he directed this movie called The Draftsman's Contract, which is sort of a murder mystery, but it's highly stylized. And, the central character is this artist who's hired to draw this house, but there's a murder. And anyway.
Oh, yeah, totally amazing. It's got all the gardens and the the sculpted greens and all that type of stuff. Totally.
Have you seen it?
Yeah,
Have
I
you
saw
seen
parts of it. I saw parts of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's a great movie. It's super weird. It's great.
Draftsman comment.
Well, like a music video. It's like a long music video.
Yeah, in some ways, it's highly stylized. It is definitely highly stylized, and the dialogue is kind of weird and stilted. It's very interesting. Peter Greenaway, his most famous movie was The Cook.
Yeah.
The Cook, his wife and her lover. Yeah,
That one I have.
great movie.
Yeah, that one I have.
And then he goes into Lewis Carroll a lot in a second.
Yes.
And I don't know much of anything at all about what he says about Lewis Carroll's use of chess to help structure his narratives. I don't know anything about that. Do you guys know anything?
Okay, well that's very interesting because Lewis Carroll, the first book, Alice in Wonderland, which people are maybe more familiar with, is it's structured around the idea of cards in a card game. But then when he got to Through the Looking Glass, he actually formally structured it as a chess game. And I didn't remind myself of the details, but it's literally like there are chunks of the text that you can ascribe to chess moves. And it's all Alice, who starts out as a pawn, and then she moves rank by rank and has adventures, and then eventually she gets to the end and is crowned queen, which is what happens when a pawn gets to the end of the board, right? As you can be turned into a queen. So he formally structured it as a chess game, and I believe that even in the first editions, like it wasn't a secret, he actually put in his introduction an explanation of the chess moves. I mean, it's certainly, you can find it in new editions. I don't know if it was originally published with the book, but it wasn't a secret.
Are those the 11 chapters of the book or something, or?
It's not actually divided strictly by chapters. The editions of the book tend to use like little asterisks or something to show when it's whenever she crosses a river. That's when she has crossed into the next rank of the chessboard.
Amazing.
I'm doing this from memory, so I should have read up on it to remind myself, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Yeah. So that's pretty neat. So Lewis Carroll formally used a chess. Now, I don't think it's I don't know if it's a legal chess game or whatever, but he did use chess very purposefully to map out the structure of that book. So there's another example of a book with an underlying structure that Manson has mentioned to us. And, we know Maze has its underlying structure in terms of how the rooms are laid out and, it's the Maze structure itself in terms of room connections. But, what other structures might there be in terms of how he planned out the narrative, or, maybe there's something along the 16-step path that forms a story based on some kind of logic. I don't know. He did say, if you guys remember, in one of the Ask Mansons, that there is a puzzle that has yet to be found.
Oh, just one?
But you mean more of an overarching one, isn't that right?
Yeah, I think he said a multi-room puzzle that has not yet been found.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
It's got to have something to do with that important note in 6.
No, I was kidding. Oh.
Just gonna.
Yeah,
just on like a surface level. I mean, you also are tempted to look on a surface level. Like, one reason I chose that billiards example is, I'm also looking at Roussel, looking for like straight up references in Maze. Like, if he's important enough to him to mention in that way, maybe he just was making straight up references. Like, I think that there are references to billiards in room 29, like maybe.
Yeah, as soon as I read about the existence of, let's see, in Locus Solus, among the surreal imagery in Locus Solus is this aerial pile driver, which is constructing a mosaic of teeth. I immediately looked up what this pile driver / plowing machine could possibly look like, just in case there was any chance that it might resemble the machine in room 16. But alas, it doesn't seem to have any similar concern.
Oh my God, we are never going to figure out what that machine is.
Well, listen, if he's got references to, or homages to people like Roussel, then God knows how difficult it's going to be, because these are some. It's not like he's really that well known. Like if maybe if you're in the circles, then you would know about French poets, but
he's not so. No, I mean, I'm sure if you're in certain literary circles or whatever, you would know about him, but I certainly had never heard about him. I found a New Yorker article about him from 2019, which was kind of interesting, but
and it was written by Christopher Manson. Amazing. It said at the bottom, it said, "Hey, and by the way, I know you've been wondering." I think it's I can't help but drool over Manson's allusion to a possible upcoming work at the end of his second letter, toward the end of his second letter. Or at least,
are you talking
or a compilation of his artistic work, if not.
Oh, are you talking about his website?
Yeah.
So that's up, actually. It's up. It's called Crooked Crow Press. I can't remember the exact URL. We can link to it in the YouTube video when this gets posted.
It's very good that I can come in and the Watson in these kinds of affairs. I'm sure many people don't know this stuff.
Yeah, I mentioned it on the Into the Abyss, I think. But yes, it's up, and it shows his printing presses, and it shows some of his.
Oh my God, I gotta say, this printing press kind of looks like the machine.
Doesn't it?
It really does.
I know. It does look like it might have been influenced, right? It's sort of like a mutated printing press or something.
Yep. Printing press / mill.
Yep. Yeah, I think everyone should check out Crooked Crow. Are we able to share screens?
Yes.
Maybe you could share the screen there so people can.
Did he buy back the licenses for his books or something, or is this just a showcase of the books that he's already published?
Yeah, I think it's something his friend put out for him, and he does these broadsheets. There's an example of it. So I think he's really interested in letterpress and historical printing methods. So he's made these beautiful broadsheets that you can see on the screen now. Really beautiful.
So did you just sell those?
I actually asked him in the last letter I wrote him, are you going to add a store to this page so people can buy this stuff? Like, people would buy this, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
So beautiful. Yeah, and so there's also information on there about his books and stuff. It seems like it's a friend who's putting it together for him. But there's pictures of his studio and him at work, and it's kind of cool.
So for those that didn't hear, it's crookedcrowpress.com.
Yeah, and we'll put a link. We'll put a link in the
print shop.
Oh, he does have a print shop. Oh, it's the print shop, not the shop. That's cool. Yeah, a lot of cool stuff in there. Yeah, I've got his other books. I've got the one about Wenceslas and the it's not as good. The one about Uncle Sam.
The Beelz I told?
Yeah, it's got a lot more stuff that looks like this.
He did, as he mentioned in the letter, he did send me one of his pieces that I guess he had produced for the Lewis Carroll Society, which was really nice. So I'm going to show you guys. It's called the Mad Gardener's Song. So it's like a print of the thing with a little piece of art done by me. This I am going to frame. I just haven't got around to it yet. It's neat, eh?
It is very Lewis. No, it's very who's the artist famously associated? Tenniel or whatever?
Tenniel, that's right, Tenniel.
Very Tenniel.
Yeah, very Tenniel and very Manson too. It's nice, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. He was very fearful to tell me anything specific. I mean, he did I asked him about Borges. You can see that he mentioned Borges, and he sort of said, I came right out and I asked him, what did I ask him? Did I say, were you thinking about House of Asterion? Here are some things that make me think you were thinking of House of Asterion, and were you? You don't have to answer, but he did. He did. I'm like, I don't care. Like, write me back. I just, whatever. You don't have to answer.
You don't have to answer. Please answer.
I know, right? I'm like, you don't have to, but I want you to. But it's okay. He did say, "Oh yes, I'm familiar with Borges," but he didn't expand. he's not going to give us very much, I don't think. But maybe he's writing his opus and he's going to release it, 5 years from his death or something. Not that I certainly don't wish.
He's played it all out.
Yeah.
Maybe
he hasn't made any puzzles and published them for a long time, or hasn't made any puzzle books.
Maybe he got it ready, and it's gonna be published after his death. That's what he's done in his will. That it's not to be published until after he's dead, and then nobody can ask him.
No one can start writing letters saying, like, you're wrong. That's not what you meant.
I would give anything to read some of the letters that he receives, such as the one that he describes at the very end of his last correspondence to you.
The multi-pages of scratched out pencil and
to the extent that it might be decipherable, it would be very fun to read.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that we come across the exact same way, so.
I know. Yeah, I don't know.
If we transcribed all of the Mazecasts onto single-spaced, wrote them out on scraps of paper laboriously, just like he describes, and mailed them to him, I'm sure he would throw those right into the fireplace as well.
How many hundreds of hours? That talk to movies. So I think that's about all I have to say about the letters for now.
Thank you very much for this presentation and this discussion.
Well, thank you for coming and talking. It was really good to talk to both of you again. It's been too long. We should do this more often.
I completely agree.
Yeah, his signature is really weird, eh?
Sure, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's unpack that. It does sort of seem to fade away.
Bad to show. Sorry, go ahead. Is it bad?
No. Go ahead.
No. I've made my observation. Is it bad to show his signature? Is that what you're worried about?
Mm-hmm.
No. I said his signature is really weird. Like, it's just the way he writes it. It doesn't.
I think
he's so careful in his paintings and his engravings, and it's like the opposite.
I know.
I don't know.
It is with many geniuses, right? Here we go.
Yeah. It's a surprising signature. Maybe not. Maybe fit right in.
What's your observation, Andrew?
Oh, only that the first one sort of fades away. Not the second one, but the first one just sort of.
Oh, that's true.
Like it starts out dense and just sort of.
It's almost like his pen was running out of ink or something.
No, that's far too straightforward an explanation.
Of course you meant
a subtle hint.
That would be too easy.
Wait. So he was in the process of being kidnapped by the Minotaur while he wrote it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I did ask him though, why did you stop writing puzzles? Because he wrote Maze, he wrote The Rails I Towed, he wrote The Practical Alchemist, and I think that's it, right? And that was all quite a long time ago. So I don't know, maybe he just lost interest in puzzles or became disillusioned. I don't know. He had the sequel in mind. He thought about writing a sequel.
Yeah, very stylistically different though.
Yes, that's true. I don't know how those pictures were made. Do you, Alex?
Oh yeah, definitely some kind of a 3D rendering program or even Photoshop. It's very reminiscent of that game Myst for the Macintosh back in the 90s.
Sure.
Like it has a lot of those. It's sort of like a vaporwave thing to it. It's got a lot of like water and hexagons and pentagon, like just polygons. I mean, and just sort of a very 90s look.
So you think it was digital?
Yeah, definitely digital. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I thought that way too at first. Yeah.
It's funny because he doesn't seem to be very interested in computer stuff, so that surprises me. But it does look digital. Right?
It's either digital or he's illustrating from a digital source. Like he has a picture in mind on a computer that he printed out or something. I don't know. But yeah, it definitely looks more sort of computerized or digital. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, it's definitely got a tone of its own. If indeed that is the sequel, and if he ever releases it as a whole thing.
It sort of seems unlikely now, doesn't it?
Yeah, because like what we've seen, well, at least what I've seen, I've only seen a couple of pages from it and a few illustrations. So I hope it comes out. Yeah, I mean, we can only hope, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what we're talking about, I guess we didn't really explain this, is we're talking about the pages of the Manson's planned sequel that he shared with White Raven, and it's posted on Into the Abyss.
Even share the screen.
Oh, thank you. Yes, there's pages that does that.
Post Resell. We'll post the Mazecast link to the letters.
Yeah.
There we go. There it is.
There they are. Yeah. So he
That is,
could be just acrylic, you know.
could be just
Yeah, you're right. Actually, now that I'm looking at it again, it's just that could be acrylic.
It's the other two that really give this sort of appearance of sort of eerie, almost 3D appearance.
It's the gradient. The gradients are not as what's the word? Manual. Like they look a lot more.
Sure, they look like they were just sort of.
Well, perfect. You know what I mean? Like like the lighting is perfect. Where the light source comes in the shadows. Well, maybe not like where the shadows are cast, but the precision of the shadows and the light. It just looks very digital.
Yeah.
So he said this room was planned to be 100 pages long, and some of the pages would be like the same room but at different times. Like the Lost Room, it's sort of 2 different pages, so it's like the same room but different times. And I mean, it sounds like it would have been amazing.
When he says 100 pages, does he mean 100 rooms, or does he mean literally 100 rooms? Right?
I think he meant pages. Do you think, Andrew?
From what you described, it sounds as if a single room might be represented on multiple pages across the book, perhaps.
Yeah.
Got it.
Well, I don't know. If he ever writes to me again, maybe that's the kind of question he would be willing to answer.
What can we do to help you? What can we do to facilitate the production of this book?
Yes. How can we make this happen?
I think we should ask him for more of his influences, because maybe the secret lies therein.
I mean, it's true. It's useful. I mean, I sort of wonder, like, I think if there was a Kickstarter or something for Manson to create a sequel to Maze, like, there would be no trouble funding that Kickstarter. I mean, if it's a matter of money, I don't think
there are like 8 of us, and we would probably each be willing to pay like $10,000 to get us.
Yeah.
So, easy.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
I mean, there's loads of people who know about and love, and I mean, there's always articles popping up, and like, you know, it's everywhere. Like, even what's his name? Who is the director of that Star Wars movie? Ryan, what's his name?
Johnson?
Huh?
Ryan Johnson?
Yeah. Ryan Johnson at one point tweeted out a picture of his bookshelf, and Maze was on it.
Hey.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So, you know, it gets around.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to see the sequel to Maze go to print on demand, which is sort of like straight to video in a way. I would want to see it produced in the same reverence as the first Maze. It's not, and
I mean, I think self-publishing has come a long way, though.
For sure.
yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I still like to hold a book. You know, I don't.
Oh, yeah.
As much as I'm into technology, like I don't have a Kindle. I like to read books. It's just how I am.
Oh, yeah.
You love a good color in the sequel if he puts it out. So I would love to see that as a book. I mean, he could probably make some extra ducats releasing it if it's about the money. Put it out digitally as well, I suppose. But I like to see a book, especially when it's a puzzle book.
I get the feeling it's more about like the work involved and
Yeah,
his level of interest in making a sequel. more than money. I could be wrong with that, but that's my feeling.
I don't think he's about the money. I don't think so. If anything, it's just about getting it out there because he'd rather it be out there than sitting on his shelf getting dusty.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see.
Might be
All right.
might be a good place to wrap up.
I think so.
The hopeful note of anticipating a sequel, probably the place that all of these things end up at.
More?
More, please, more. Well, this was such a pleasure, you guys.
It was great. Thanks, everybody.
Us.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.
Until next time.